Thank you, Julie, and thank you everybody for having me here tonight. It's a pleasure to be in Cabrillo Marine Aquarium. I've heard so much about this place, and I spent the day going around with Dr. Passarelli today looking at all the programs that the aquarium does here, and you guys are so lucky to have a place like this in Cabrillo. It really is a very special place. So today I want to tell you a little bit about some work that I've been doing with the world's biggest fish, the whale shark, and to do that I'm going to have to take you on a little bit of a round the world journey to study this species in all of its glory. So this is a terribly frustrating and difficult species to study, but I hope you'll enjoy the journey as we go along. And my story starts at the Georgia Aquarium in Atlanta, because I'm currently the CEO of the Museum of Science and History in Jacksonville, but I started out doing a lot of this work with my colleagues at the Georgia Aquarium. And that story starts in Atlanta, where the aquarium has whale sharks in the Ocean Voyager exhibit. And that is a fantastic opportunity that we took very seriously, because whenever you can blow people's minds with an exhibit like that, you can make them receptive to whatever science and conservation message you might like to give them. And so we need to be ready in that moment with all of the data and all of the stories to tell people, so that they can go away with added value to the experience that they had at the aquarium and having a better understanding of the ocean and what it takes to protect it. So that's a very important moment for us. But then we need to go out to the world and collect all that data so that we have the information that we need ready to go. So the blue part you can see on the world map here is the distribution of whale sharks around the world. So this is a circumtropical fish. So everywhere where the water is above about 72 degrees, you can expect to find whale sharks. But it's not particularly common anywhere in that range. And that's made it a very difficult species to study. For a long time, we thought that they were solitary, open ocean giants out there behaving themselves and not bothering anybody and not really encountering people very much. In fact, there's an apocryphal story that Jacques Cousteau never saw a whale shark throughout his career. I don't think that's true. I think I have evidence that he saw one once in Mexico. But suffice to say, he didn't see a lot. And if someone like Jacques Cousteau is not running into this species very much, then that's evidence for you that it is not the most abundant species to run into. However, as you'll see, there are a couple of places in the world now that we've discovered where you can see them reliably, and that has changed everything. So, very intractable species to study. Chapter 1, I want to talk about constellations, which is the made-up collective noun for whale sharks. We didn't have one, so I ran a poll on a blog post, and constellation was the most popular answer. It's since found its way into a couple of scientific papers, and I put it in a book. So now people use this word, or at least I do, for talking about groups of whale sharks. And this is a very, very powerful concept, because once you have a group of animals, you can study them as a population. And to do that, I want to take you to Mexico. Mexico is blessed with two coasts, right? The Pacific coast that you guys know, but also the Atlantic coast that faces onto the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. And I want to talk about particularly a place that faces the Gulf of Mexico side, a little town called Holbox, which is on a peninsula on the northern side of the peninsula there. And way back at around the year 2000, actually a little bit before that, they had discovered some pretty reliable whale sharks were present in the coastal waters of Holbox. It's a tiny, sleepy fishing village, and these animals were very close to shore in water that was less than 50 feet deep. And when they went out there, that's what they found. Whale sharks swimming along, feeding. You can tell they're feeding because they've got the top jaw out of the water. And sort of a green, soupy-looking water. And whale sharks feeding. And they would find 1, 2, maybe a dozen whale sharks in one place at a time. But it seemed to be pretty reliable. And a little cottage tourism industry sprang up of people going to Holbox to swim with the whale sharks. When you see green, soupy water like this, it means productivity. Means that there's plankton and stuff in the water. In this case, primarily copepods is what the whale sharks were there to feed on. But it's not a particularly good tourist experience because the water is kind of green and soupy. You actually have to be quite close to them, maybe dangerously close to them to see them very well, because otherwise they're just in the green, hazy gloom. But it was enough for this tourism activity to spring up, a little bit of economic activity in Holbox, and started to get the attention of the scientific community. In fact, in their wisdom, the Mexican government established the Whale Shark Biosphere Reserve in 2009. You can see it as the red box here, butting up against the Yalajao National Park that was already in place around Holbox. And all of this was to go around, I think I'm not sure if there's a pointer on this, but you can see some circles inside the red box up the top. Those were sightings of whale sharks off Holbox, off Cabo Cotoche actually is the most popular place to see them. But those of you who are keenly watching will also see this other group of dots over here. So immediately after the whale shark biosphere was created, all of the whale sharks left Holbox and went to Isla Contoy off the coast of Cancun. This changed everything. Not only were they now outside the marine protected area, they were now within a short speedboat ride of the major tourist destination city of Cancun, very close to Isla Mujeres. You can be from Isla Mujeres to Isla Contoy in about 45 minutes in a cigarette boat. So now you could have big time tourism, capital T tourism, where people could go and swim with whale sharks. But not only that, there were lots of whale sharks. Not one whale shark or 10 whale shark or 20 whale sharks. The most we ever counted was 420 whale sharks in the same place at the same time. It was and remains one of the largest known aggregations of whale sharks in the world. And it's taking place in crystal clear blue water, a 45-minute boat ride from Cancun. So that changed everything about our understanding and actually the conservation threats subsequently to whale sharks in Atlantic Mexico. You cannot take this picture anymore because now there would be as many boats as there are whale sharks. So it is a challenge. What are they doing there? I told you that if food was abundant in the water, it would be green and soupy, right? Yes, but they're definitely feeding, because this animal's definitely feeding, top jaw out of the water, plowing along, doing their thing. But there is only one food item that can be present in abundance without turning the water soupy, and that's fish eggs. So when you go and do this activity, has anyone been, by the way, to Isla Mujeres to dive with whale sharks? You have? Okay. You may remember getting out of the water and having grit in your hair, or maybe in your belly button. It's my favorite place. Fish eggs get stuck all over you. And so they are there to eat fish eggs. What fish, I hear you ask? Glad you asked. It's this fish. It's the little tunny, Euthynis alliteratus. And it turns out whale sharks have a very special relationship with this fish. Wherever you go in the world and find whale sharks, you will find this fish not far away. In fact, I'm quite convinced that they follow each other. Whale sharks follow the tuna so that when they spawn, they can eat their eggs. Kind of antisocial behavior, really. And I'm pretty sure that the tuna actually follow the whale sharks too. We've put camera tags on whale sharks. One day for a lark, I put the camera on facing backwards to see who was behind the whale shark, and it was being followed by a bunch of these guys. So there seems to be a special relationship there. A lot to work to do to understand what that relationship is about. Thankfully, this tuna is not particularly important for fisheries or sushi or anything like that, but it is very important ecologically and very tightly connected to the biology of whale sharks. So they are there to eat the eggs of this fish, and eat them they do for all day, every day, for about 4.5 months between May and September. It's a fantastic biological congress that takes place very accessibly to a major city that you can visit fairly easily. So it really is a great experience to go and see. And notwithstanding the tourist pressures, it is an amazing event if you ever get to go and look at it. So it's very special. Ironically, never actually seen this fish spawning in this location. But we know it happens because when we go to where the whale sharks are, the water is full of fish eggs. And when we take those fish eggs and sequence their DNA, it's always the same species, always the same species. So probably what's happening is that an ephemeral rush of tuna is happening in the pre-dawn hours. They all rush to the surface, huge spawning event. And then just as quickly, the fish disperse before the sun even rises. So by the time we get out there with boats at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, the eggs are all floating at the surface and the whale sharks have appeared and they sit there and suck down bathtubs of egg soup for the rest of the day. So really remarkable experience. And being part of the group that discovered and described this event was one of the highlights of my career to that point. We have since discovered about 24 other places in the world where whale sharks gather reliably enough in constellations that you can either plan to visit them for tourist activities or plan to do some systematic scientific research with them. And that's super important. Cannot plan a systematic science program if you can't count on the animal that you want to study actually being there. So in these places, and I could fill a whole talk talking about any one of these places, but you'll notice most of them are close to shore. Not a huge surprise, that's where most people are. So we see them close to the shore, but they are reliable enough that we can do science to understand them. Most of them are dominated by juvenile males. About 3 to 1, sometimes 4 to 1 or 5 to 1 ratio of juvenile males to females. We know they're born 50-50 male and female. So something's happening here where there's some segregation of the ocean, where juvenile males are dominating these sites. And they're primarily feeding aggregations. But after studying this population for about 5 years, I started to realize that trying to understand this species by studying the juvenile males in Mexico is like trying to understand the human race by studying teenage boys. And as a former teenage boy myself, I don't think that's a very good idea. It's a very messy place up here. So if we wanted to understand the full richness of the biology of whale sharks, we were going to have to go further afield to study them. But we also did some other cool things while we were at it, like studying photo identification. This was my first introduction to photo ID. And whale sharks are made for photographic identification because spots. Right? So the spot patterns on whale sharks can be analyzed by a computer to help you understand and recognize individual animals. They took the algorithm from the Hubble telescope, the one that the Hubble telescope uses to recognize which part of the sky that it's looking at based on the arrangement of stars, works perfectly for identifying whale sharks based on the spots on their side. They've since expanded this to a couple of dozen other species, including the spots on cheetahs, the patterns on poison dart frogs, and even the pattern of whiskers on the snouts of polar bears. Works really well. So these days they've got AI to work on it. You don't even have to upload the photos anymore. It all works off YouTube. It's fantastic. But back in the day when we used to have to mark the spots manually and upload it, it was the best computer game I ever played. I loved it. So by the time we left Mexico, we described over 2,000 individual whale sharks that were visiting that place regularly. One of the animals gave us a hint about what we ought to do next. This is a satellite tag track from a single individual whale shark. She was tagged where the red X is up in the upper left corner there. And she was affectionately known as Rio Lady, tagged by our colleagues at the Mote Marine Lab in Florida. And instead of going into the Gulf of Mexico or hanging around Cancun, after she was tagged at that Afware aggregation, one of the rare females that we see there, and also rare for being an adult, she turned around and went the complete opposite direction. And she went all the way through the Caribbean, through the Windward Islands, across the coast of South America, past a very strange place called St. Peter and St. Paul Rocks, the asterisks there, one of the few rocky islands in the North Atlantic there, until her tag came off just southeast of St. Peter and St. Paul Rocks. And she's since been back to the Afware aggregation, and they've tagged her a couple more times, and she always goes the same way. So we were now hearing that, okay, if we want to understand what a big pregnant female is, or looking pregnant female, or an adult female at least, we shouldn't be looking in Cancun. We're going to have to go look somewhere else. So I started to ask questions about the rest of the life history of whale sharks. If there are all these juvenile males here and at these other aggregation sites, where's the rest of the life history happening? Where are the adult females? Where are the really little ones? Where are they mating? Where are they giving birth? And that led me to the next chapter and a total change of location. We're going to leave Mexico now and go further to the southeast, into the South Atlantic, looking for love at the end of the earth. If you look, unlike the Pacific, which is replete with islands, if you've ever looked at the West Pacific, there's thousands of islands between Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia, Indonesia. There's islands everywhere. It's not true in the South Atlantic. In the South Atlantic, there are 5 islands that are in the accessible part of the whale shark habitat and aren't coastal. You can count Sao Tome and Principe as well if you want. 3 of them are adjacent to Brazil, and Brazilian properties, including St. Peter and St. Paul Rocks, the one I mentioned before. Really wanted to go there, but it's very difficult. You have to get dropped off by a tuna fishing boat that is contracted by the Brazilian Navy. And while you're there, you have to look after the weather station for the Navy. And to learn how to do that, they have to teach you a 2-week course in Portuguese. So I kind of ditched that idea and looked for somewhere where it was going to be a little easier to work. Thankfully, there are 2 English-speaking territories in the South Atlantic as well, Ascension and St. Helena. There's also Tristan da Cunha, which is a third part of the territory. It's a little too cold down there, so we're going to leave that one out. And so I called the Chief Fisheries Officer in St. Helena and asked if they had seen any whale sharks there. They call them bone sharks. And she said, yes, we do actually. And actually, there seem to be more than there used to be. And so, well, that's curious. I said, why don't you send someone over to the whale shark conference that we're going to host at the aquarium and send the sightings database, and we'll have a look at what you got and see if it's worth planning a trip to St. Helena. And so they did that. And when she came over, she bought her sightings database. And as I was reading it curiously at the conference, I saw not 1, but 2 eyewitness accounts of whale sharks mating in their sightings database. And I nearly fell off my chair because whale shark mating had never been seen anywhere else ever in the world. And they had not one, but two eyewitness accounts. And so that was it. I'm like, I am going to St. Helena, come hell or high water. I'm going to go make fish porn at the end of the world. It is an amazing place. It is a single island, not an archipelago, just one rocky peak that sticks out up smack in the middle of the South Atlantic. It's most famous as the second place that Napoleon was exiled. He got away the first time from Elba. He did not get away the second time from St. Helena, not because of any great military tactic on the part of the English, but because he died of stomach cancer in 1821. But you can still go and visit Longwood Mansion where he stayed, and you can actually go visit his former grave. It's weird to have a former grave, but he has a former grave in St. Helena. It's empty because his remains were repatriated to France sometime after that. But that's why it's most famous. But pretty soon it's going to be most famous as the place that has some of the best whale sharking you can go to anywhere in the world. So when I first started going there, they had no airport. So the only way to get there is by ship from Cape Town on the RMS, the Royal Mail ship, St. Helena, one of the last mail ships in operation. It's now been decommissioned. And it took about 5 days each way from Cape Town, South Africa. It is really a commitment to get there. I could tell you all about the airport. That's a whole story too, but it was really cool to travel across the South Atlantic on a ship like this. 5 days of complete disconnection from the world and 5 days to plan and think about the science that we were going to do when we got there. And when you get there, it is something else. One of the most visually spectacular places I've ever seen. You keep wondering, how was this place ever colonized? There's nowhere to land. It's just cliffs all the way around, like the barn, which is the big one in the back here, and Turk's Cap in the bottom right-hand side. Interestingly, this is the same ice plant that you guys have growing over the hills here. So, the barn in the back there, just off to the coast, you can see a couple of shadow patches, cloud shadows on the water. There's one of those is over a place called Barn Cap, a little bottom feature that sticks up about 25 feet from the surface. And there, whale sharks go to gather. But it's not like Mexico. It's not dominated by juvenile males. Here, it's equal numbers of adult males and adult females. So the ones in Mexico, somewhere between 15 to 25, 27 feet in length. Objectively a big fish, right? But actually pretty small. Because compared to these guys, we're more like 20 to 30, sometimes 33 feet long. As I went there, the other thing I found in St. Helena was some of the most hospitable, resourceful, creative, welcoming people that I've ever met. There are 4,000 people who live on this island. Can you imagine living on a tiny speck of rock in the middle of the ocean, 5 ship days from the nearest land? It's amazing. The woman on the right, I should say, is Liz Klingham, proud to call her a good friend and colleague these days. Fascinating people. The locals call themselves saints, and they look like all of us because they are all of us. Every ship in the great 500-year maritime history of the island that ever passed to the Orient around the bottom of South Africa stopped at St. Helena to take on lemons and fresh water. And so the people that you have there, Chinese, Malaysian, Indian, African, English, and everybody has all of that. So they look and truly are the most multi-ethnic people you can imagine. They have an amazing accent too, if you ever get a chance to meet a saint. Wonderful people, and I just wanted to acknowledge Liz in particular because she was the one who left the island for the first time in her life to come to Atlanta and bring us the sightings database with the eyewitness accounts of the mating in it. She'd only left the island once before to get married in South Africa, so that barely counts to them because the shuttle between South Africa and the island is really their only link to the mainland. So she'd never been anywhere else. To then go on from Cape Town to Germany to catch a flight to Atlanta so that she could go to the conference really was pretty remarkable. This is what you get in St. Helena. This is the little delicate flower that is me swimming with one of my favorite whale sharks. We call him Brick. He's called Brick because the first time I tried to tag him, it took 7 goes to get the tag in through his skin. Whale sharks have the thickest skin in the animal kingdom. It's up to 5 inches thick over their back, and it has the texture of vulcanized rubber. So I was shooting him with a 300-pound spear gun, and the spear tip was just bouncing off. And he didn't even flinch. So we finally did get the tag on. You can see it there attached. But he showed up several times after that. And this is representative of what you would see in St. Helena. A very fit and athletic looking adult male whale shark, about 30 feet long. We never did get to see whale sharks mating in St. Helena. So I didn't get to make my movie, unfortunately. But it's just a matter of time. Somebody will. Some lucky tourist or some lucky local in St. Helena, now that they're aware of what's happening in their local waters, is going to be Johnny on the spot with a camera one day and catch this in action. By all accounts, there's a lot of splashing involved. So. We did a lot of tagging while we were there. Number one thing you do when you study a marine megafauna species, put tags on them. Expensive satellite tags that cost between $1,500 and $4,000 each. You can see the total number of tags we put on there at the top there. So you do the mental math yourselves. It was expensive. Unfortunately, only 5 of those 38 tags had missions that lasted longer than 3 months, even though they were programmed to last for 1 to 2 years. In fact, most of them, 31, had missions that lasted less than a month. Most of those were crushed by pressure. Now, these tags have a self-protection mechanism that cuts off, releases it from the animal if the animal dives below 1,650 meters. So that's about 4,500 feet, I guess. So they were diving very deep. Some of them never reported at all, and they were probably destroyed by dives where the self-protection mechanism didn't fire the way it was supposed to. It really was an example of just exactly how difficult this species is to work with. It doesn't have to surface to breathe, so you can put a tag on an animal and never hear from it again because it doesn't have to surface. It's not a turtle or a whale. It doesn't have to come back and break the surface. They can go down and spend the next 6 months underwater, the whole life of your tag, and you'll never hear a thing. So it is a very difficult species to study. So our main question was, is St. Helena more connected to the west coast of Africa or to the east coast of South America? So you can see a couple of stars there where some tags popped off. They were going in generally all directions, but mostly towards Ascension, the nearest island, about 700 miles away. So that didn't help us much. Then we had a tag wash up on a beach near Lagos in Nigeria, in the Gulf of Cameroon, 1,648 miles from St. Helena. Unfortunately, because the tag popped off very close to the coast, it was only floating for a couple of days before it landed on a beach. And once it lands on the beach, it lies over and stops talking to the satellite, and so we never heard from it again. I tried to find someone in Lagos who could go and look for it, but I'm not particularly well connected in that part of Nigeria, so I didn't get any help with that. We had another tag that reported from the ocean near Fernando de Noronha, one of those other Brazilian rocky islands, and perhaps that was not a surprise. 2,112 miles from St. Helena. But the best story was the one that washed up on a beach near Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, 2,250 miles away from St. Helena, which was found by a marine biologist. She was a dolphin scientist out taking a walk on the beach, and she found my tag on the beach. And so she emailed me, because I put my email address on the outside of the tags, because I'm suicidal that way. She emailed me. I said, great, can you please drop it in a package and send it to me? She put it in a DHL package, and I'm going to call out DHL here because I have to. Sent it to me, and guess what? Package never arrived in Atlanta. To this day, I have no idea what a treasure trove of data might have been on that tag. And getting tags back in person is the best thing, because the data they relay by satellite is only ever a summary. When you want to get really what's happening, you've got to get the tag back. And so that one broke my heart a little bit. And of course, we didn't answer our question. Africa or South America? The answer is both. And we still didn't get to make our whale shark video. And that was over 6 expeditions over the course of almost 10 years. So this is a very difficult species to study. But every now and then you do get a corker, and this is one good tag track that we got. So this is some diving data from a tag from St. Helena. So just to orient you, the number of days across the top, and the depth is on the left there in feet. And so you'll probably see straight away 2 patterns. The first pattern, while the animal was around St. Helena for about the first 100 days, the animal was diving to about 2,000 feet every day, very regularly. Curiously regularly, actually. The biologists in the room will be like, that is very regular. So normally 2,000 feet in that part of the world, which is about 12,000 feet deep, would just be Mid-depths, nothing particularly interesting. So what we think is probably happening there is the bottom feature, somewhere on the bottom near St. Helena, where they're all going, probably to mate. So we didn't get to see that. But then the animal leaves the confines of St. Helena and goes out into the open ocean where it is 12 to 15,000 feet deep, and the pattern changes. Now we're not diving as regularly, but we're diving much, much deeper. Something interesting seems to be happening around 6,000 feet down. It's about halfway to the bottom. Probably an artifact. That's actually as much as the tag can measure. 6,000 feet is the maximum depth that sensor will read. So we don't actually know how deep this animal was diving. And to this day, we don't know how deep a whale shark can dive. Suffice to say that they are by far the deepest diving fish known to science. And this is a radical act, because at the surface it might be 83 degrees. Once you go below 2,000 feet, it's about 37 degrees everywhere in the world. It doesn't matter where you are. Once you go below the reach of sunlight, it's all about 37 degrees. And then you're getting into crushing pressures at that sort of depth. So it's this kind of environment, right? You know, the deep, dark, flabby, glow-in-the-dark, toothy things that you see in the deep sea. Whale sharks are not strangers to this habitat. They're regular visitors. And that was something that we didn't know before we started doing this research. I'm still working with a group in Queensland trying to come up with a tag that can stick with a whale shark the full depth of their dives. I think they probably go all the way to the bottom, although why and how is a complete mystery. All right, let's go now from the Atlantic over South America to the Eastern Tropical Pacific for a chapter I'm calling Un poco panzona, like a little bit chubby. That's what this means, which is how the whale sharks were described to me when I first went to the Galapagos. How many's been to the Galapagos before? Fantastic, isn't it? Just the greatest place. Save your pennies, go do a liverboard in the Galapagos. You won't regret it. It's fantastic. But not just any part of the Galapagos. If you want to see whale sharks, you have to go to Darwin Island. It's a little tiny island in the upper left inset. It's actually a lot further away than it looks. This is an inset that's almost 2 days of steaming to get from the main Galapagos Islands to Darwin and Wolf. But Darwin is absolutely fabulous, and it's the warmest part of the Galapagos and home to the largest whale sharks in the world. This is our exotic research vessel that we take, the Queen Mabel. The last time I went on this vessel, it started to take on water, and we actually had to be rescued in the middle of the night by doing gunnel ballet from one boat to another but she didn't sink all the way. She was towed back to Santa Cruz, where she still sits at anchor. I think they've turned her into a restaurant now, but we would live on board this with a dozen of your best colleague friends. You get to know each other really well when you stay with people for 3 weeks on a boat like that. You know each other by smell. It's gross. You can't land on the island, mostly because it's a cliff all the way around, but also because it's a protected area. So you park in the lee of the island, you jump in a dinghy, and you go over to this incredible feature called Darwin's Arch. It's almost like Mother Nature is telling us there's something special happening down here, because this random patch of Eastern Tropical Pacific has this geological feature, and underneath it, the best dive site I've ever been to, hands down. The pelagic action at this place is amazing. Even if you don't see a whale shark, which you do on about every second dive, on the other dives, you usually see at least 500 hammerheads. And I'm not kidding, at least 500 hammerheads, and huge schools of pelagic animals like these that are protected by the tyranny of distance in the open Eastern Tropical Pacific. But places like this give me hope that the ocean still has incredible things to see and discover and experience. And I encourage you to take a dive there if you can. Get some dives under your belt, though. It's not for kids. It's pretty hair-raising diving. The currents are very, very strong. But every now and then, you'll run into truly enormous whale sharks. So here I am again with one of the big Galapagos females. So I told you the ones in Mexico, 15 to 20, 25 feet long. In St. Helena, up to 30, 33 feet long. These are females, all females, and they're up to 45 feet long. So a 45-foot whale shark, twice as big as a 22-foot whale shark, twice as long, 8 times the weight. So they are truly enormous. You know those big yellow school buses? This is a shark the size of one of those. And so the first time I saw one swim out of the gloom, I couldn't even talk. It was amazing. I realized I'd been studying tadpoles for the last 10 years. So I thought it was hard studying juvenile males close to the coast. Try studying a whale shark of this size in the eastern open tropical Pacific. This is kind of fisheye looking lens, but what I want to draw your attention to is one of these big females, this white area here towards the back of her abdomen, looking a little panzona, a little chubby, a little bulgy. We started to think, okay, they're all female, and the little bulgy in the belly department, we're a smart lot, we marine biologists, we're like, okay, we think this might be a pupping ground, right? Only females, they look pregnant. Let's call this a pupping ground. Here's another picture from my colleague, Simon Pearce, showing this bulgy, lumpy, it almost looks like there are bulges underneath the surface in this area that looks like there might be something happening on the inside. But how are you going to know? I mean, they're not going to sit still for you to do an ultrasound, right? You're right, they're not going to sit still, but thankfully, we have a secret weapon. His name is Dr. Rui Matsumoto, and he works at the Okinawa Churami Aquarium in Japan, where they also have whale sharks, and where they have developed an underwater ultrasound. And Rui, to sort of culturally appropriate for a second, Rui is a scuba ninja. He's underwater with his ultrasound here, which he built the box himself. In this picture, he has a Pegasus unit, which is like extra bit of propulsion attached to his tank to help you keep up. This is not a static activity. So mostly you ultrasound a whale shark by holding the probe still and letting her swim over the probe from head to tail. We were able to image all kinds of internal organs, hearts, liver, spiral valve, colon, gonads, ovaries, and out of the 28 that he was able to ultrasound, do you know how many of them were pregnant? 0. So all of those donors that we had told we were spending their money going to the Galapagos to study pregnancy in whale sharks. Yeah, there were some awkward phone calls after that, but it's okay. I mean, that's how science works, right? We make discoveries, we have hypotheses, they get rejected, you put them aside, come up with a new hypothesis. What are all these giant females doing in the Galapagos if it's not to give birth? And what are those bulgy bellies about if it's not full of babies? There is nothing in that part of the body except muscle and connective tissue. We have no idea what this is all about. So another enduring question about whale sharks. One of the questions we might have had is, okay, where are the really big males? Now we're starting to think that there aren't any, that males top out at around 30 to 33 feet long, and females are the only ones that keep growing until they're 45. All right, let's go from the eastern tropical Pacific all the way over to the western tropical Pacific now for a last science chapter I'm calling Trapeze. It's about this part of Indonesia in the red circle. We call it Cendrawasih Bay. It's part of the Bird's Head region. Raja Ampat is a well-known diving site not far away. It's the part of Indonesia that is on the island of New Guinea. And when you get to this part of Indonesia, you find these a lot. This is called a bagan. A bagan is this giant, square, double outriggered boat that they use for fishing. And it's a very peculiar type of fishing. So they basically have a giant square net. So they drop to the bottom underneath the boat. It's about 100 feet down. And they shine bright lights in the water at night. And little bait fish come and gather under the boat. And about 4 or 5 times a night, men stand all around the edge of the bagan and haul this thing up manually to catch puri, which in puri are these little silvery fish. They're all different types of species. They don't really discriminate on what species they are. They're just, if they're silvery and about this big, they call them puri. But the whale sharks have learned this, and they come and hang around at the bagans to eat the puri and the other things that gather in the lights underneath the bagan at nighttime. Sometimes they even bite on the nets from the outside. But every now and then, a whale shark zigs when it ought to zag, and it ends up on the inside of the net. And so we heard about this fishery interaction. You can see the puri in there as well. First thing I want to do is assure you that this animal is fine. You might have heard this story that sharks have to swim in order to breathe. That is true, but only for certain types of sharks that have what we call rigid gill baskets. They can't move their gills. Whale sharks are not in that group. They're in a different group that is perfectly capable of aspirating their own gills. So this animal is just sitting there peacefully on the bottom of the net, breathing. And the fishermen usually just cordon them off to one side of the net while they process their catch, and then they let the whale shark go. But when I saw this, 2 things occurred to me. One, as a scientist, thank God, a whale shark that's not moving. It finally planned some science where I get to spend some quality time with my study animal. And the second thing that struck me was how similar it looked to the trapeze that we set up in Georgia Aquarium when we wanted to do veterinary exams on whale sharks. Looks exactly the same. We had been using techniques like this to do vet exams for some time, and here was an opportunity to try it with a wild whale shark. So we planned an expedition with colleagues from Conservation International. We went out there and did the first wild health assessments of whale sharks in the Bargans. So here I am taking a blood sample from a whale shark, a slightly complicated rig. No need to explain it to you, but except to say that it's a blind stick. You know, when you go to the doctor's office and they need to see the vein in order to know where to put the needle. We don't know where we're pushing the needle here. You try, if you don't get anything, you pull out, you move an inch and you go back in again. Thankfully, whale sharks don't care because you're a mosquito to them. So, but eventually, with a little practice and some knowledge about where to go, you can reliably get blood samples from whale sharks. And that allowed us, for the first time, to ask questions about the internal health of the world's largest fish. The first question they wanted to know was, is this Bargan interaction harmful? Is sitting in the bottom of the net like that for up to 12 hours doing them any damage? I'm pleased to tell you that their blood samples say no, they're fine. You might expect if they were stressed, their lactate levels would go up or some other enzyme indicator like creatine kinase or alkaline phosphatase would go up. That doesn't happen in this case. They seem to be able to tolerate sitting in the net just fine. It's perhaps not a surprise. Their closest relatives are wobbegongs and other carpet sharks that live on the bottom and spend most of their time not moving at all. And in fact, whale sharks are fundamentally lazy. They cover a lot of ocean, but they never swim particularly fast. They like to go very, very slow. We also got to do things like put tags on properly. Instead of using a spear to jab it into their skin, we could put holes in their dorsal fin and bolt them on so that they stay on for 12 months. And in fact, here's an animal that's been at large for 12 months. And now you can take this tag off and put a new one on. And then that way we can get multi-year series of where the animal goes. It's really very cool. But for me as a biologist, part of what I loved the most about this was just spending some quality time with my study animal. So here I am taking a cheeky peek into the gills of a whale shark that I'm sitting in the net with. They don't mind, they just seem very, very chill animals. My favorite part, letting them go at the end of it. And so you can see my colleague from CI, Abam Sianapar, in the bottom there, and me celebrating as this animal takes its liberty from the net and swims away. These are all 100% juvenile males. The frustrating thing about putting these tags on and getting multi-year time series from them, they don't go anywhere. They live in the bay because it's full of Bargans and there's lots of food. So why would you go anywhere else? And so we finally get to put tags on that will last for 2 years and they don't move. So maddening. We've since taken that technique back to the Galapagos, and now we're taking blood samples from free-swimming giant females. So you see the progression here from developing the technique in the aquarium, taking it to a controlled situation in a fishery interaction in Indonesia, and then taking it to a wild free-swimming animal. And getting able to get blood samples from these animals is really opening the door to ask all kinds of questions about what's happening on the inside of a whale shark. And that's important because there are threats to this species. So I have to take a serious tone for 1 second and talk about how this has changed. Back in 1986, which is now 40 years ago, I believe I'm saying that out loud, we didn't think whale sharks were particularly endangered. Maybe vulnerable, but not endangered. And then my colleague that I wrote my book with in 30 years later saying, yes, not only are they endangered, but very data-driven, right? You can tell you, 63% decline in the Indo-Pacific population. So we now know that this species is significantly endangered. And so for those of you who are interested in these kinds of things, the whale shark did move from vulnerable to endangered in 2016 as a result of the workshop that we held at the aquarium in 2013. So, major threats. Fishing is a threat. It's not legal to fish whale sharks pretty much anywhere in the world now, and yet it still happens deliberately, accidentally. Not so much on commercial, industrial scale anywhere. That got shut down in about 2013, but it does still happen from time to time. It's also possible to love them to death. This is tourism in the Maldives. This whale shark should be feeding on the surface, but it's not because of all of that splashy, fleshy humans that are up there that are disturbing the day. So tourism needs to be regulated in order to keep it safe for people and whale sharks. We want people to make a relationship with the world's biggest fish, but you've got to do it in a way that's safe for both of you, right? And this is not safe for the whale sharks. Not safe for the people too, honestly. Most of the people I swam with in Mexico were hopelessly overestimating their skills in the water. And it's dangerous. You can get yourself in trouble. Lots of boats, lots of large animals, lots of people. It's a recipe for damage. I worry a lot about plastic. So this is in St. Helena in the South Atlantic. It's plastic on the beach. They have a black sand beach there, so it really helps show up how much of this is plastic. Everything that's not black there is plastic. And here is an animal that is pretty much custom made for sucking floating plastic off the surface of the ocean. What impact does all this plastic have on whale sharks? We don't know yet. But being able to take blood samples is an open door to maybe being able to ask those kinds of questions, which we couldn't do even 15 years ago. So they run into boats a lot. This is a prop scar from an animal in the Maldives that's been hit by a small boat. Unfortunately, when they get hit by big boats, it's a pretty binary outcome, right? So every now and then a ship will come into harbor with a whale shark wrapped around the bow. No marine animal, even a blue whale, can compete with the size and speed of a modern commercial ship. And so this is probably the biggest threat to the health of whale sharks. But worse than whales, the great whales will float when they die. Whale sharks, like all sharks, sink when they're dead. So this is a silent killer and very hard to estimate exactly how many animals die this way. Suffice to say that I told you before that this animal lives in first gear. So if they get hit by a ship, they're not able to swim fast enough to get out of the way. But there is reason to be hopeful. And here's why. I'm going to put up the panda as my reason why we should be hopeful about this. Why the panda? Well, here's a species so iconic that the world's largest conservation organization made it their icon. And it worked. The panda came off the endangered list a few years ago. Why is that important? Well, it was the same day, it was the same press release where the whale shark went onto the endangered species list, was the one where the panda came off. And when I looked at these two animals as a biologist and conservationist, I didn't see them as being particularly different, aside from one being, all wet and stuff. Both large-bodied, both harmless, both very charismatic species. One's covered in spots, for goodness sakes. Phylogenetically unique, ecologically unique. They have very many similar characteristics. And I don't see why the whale shark can't be the panda of the open ocean. And I think we should strive to make that happen because it worked for the panda and for the other animals that share the panda's habitat in the bamboo forests of northern China. Call that an umbrella species that can protect other species by virtue of its conservation. So we use these two terms a little bit interchangeably. They're not quite. A flagship species represents, for a species or an ecosystem, umbrella species confer protections on other species. Whale sharks could be both for the open ocean. And we think it's an ideal flagship species. I'm not the only person who thinks that. This is from Brad Norman, who's one of the world's leading whale shark scientists, saying whale shark would be a great flagship species because it's charismatic. All the things that I just pointed out to do with pandas. Does anybody know who this is? Who's this? That's Destiny the whale shark from the Disney movie Finding Dory. And I put this up because this marks a transition from being a poorly understood, enigmatic open ocean critter to being the first speaking, full-fledged character in a Disney animated movie. That is a transition for any animal on its path towards being publicly understood and publicly embraced. And when you get people to care about an animal like this because they grew up watching Destiny, then you've got real power to affect change on behalf of that species. And so I think of this, think of it as cartoonish, but I think this is a really profound moment in conservation because once you get to this point, everybody can love a whale shark because you've seen Finding Dory. And so I think there's hope for whale sharks. And we know from some conservation work that we've done that they have the capacity to respond to the 100% of their pre-industrial population if we give them a chance. And I think that's worth doing because the ocean and indeed the whole world is a much more interesting and gratifying place with whale sharks in it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Al, so much. We can take some questions. Oh, sorry, one moment. Let me remind everybody. I forgot to mention this. So if everyone looks up for a moment, you see those white saucers. Those are microphones. And Zach is about to flick them on. So now they're live. So it's a hot mic. So basically everybody at home can hear everything you say. So I just want to warn you guys about that. So it's basically so they can hear your questions, but if you're chit-chatting over there, they can hear you. So just beware, okay? So please, let's ask, and we can see some of the hearts and the people at home clapping. So please, questions for Dr. Duff.
If you understood, what are the longitudinal ridges on the side of the whale shark that other sharks haven't got?
Yeah, so what are the ridges on the side of whale sharks and why don't other sharks have them? Actually, a couple of them do. The zebra shark or Indo-Pacific leopard shark does have the ridges and actually is a close relative of the whale shark. We think that those ridges confer some strength, some structural strength to the outside of the body. So if you ever take a piece of cardboard and fold it into zigzags, it's much stronger and resistant to being bent than a flat piece of cardboard. We think it's that kind of thing. Because their spine doesn't confer a lot of rigidity, they have what we call anguilliform swimming. They swim like eels. They get a lot of their body's strength from that incredible 5-inch thick skin that wraps around them. And by fluting the outside surface of that skin and putting a particularly tough layer of denticles on the outside, it adds another layer of strength to the outside of the body. So anything that wants to bite a whale shark, if it can even get through at all, it's just going to get a mouthful of gristle. Yeah.
What is the average lifespan of the whale shark, and have you found any patterns or differences based on the region that they're located or whether they're deep divers or not?
What is the average lifespan of a whale shark? We don't know yet. We thought it was about 75 years, about the same as a human, but it's all pins on whether when you count the rings in the vertebrae of a whale shark, like a tree, when you cut a tree down, does a ring represent 1 year, 6 months, or 2 years? So most recent research suggests that 75 was an underestimate and that they might live to be as long as 150 years old. And those big females that we see in Galapagos might be over 100 years old. What was the second part of your question?
Did you notice if there was any difference in the lifespan depending on the region of the world that they frequented or if they were deep divers?
Yeah, we don't have that level of understanding yet of where the old ones are, except the big ones are typically going to be older. We do think that there are maybe two populations in the world, the Atlantic population and the Indo-Pacific population, being a little bit different from each other genetically. Yes?
Do they give live birth, or do you know that?
I can't believe I didn't mention this. Do they give live birth? Yes, they give live birth. They have the largest litter thighs of any shark. Everything that we know about whale shark birth is based on one female that was necropsied in a fish market in Taiwan, and she had 306 pups. They all had the same genetic dad, but they were all at different stages of development. So sharks do funky stuff with reproduction. Let me tell you, like we could fill a whole talk about that, but save that for Valentine's Day. They probably engage in long-term sperm storage. So they mate once with a male, hold on to the sperm and use it to fertilize a production line of eggs that are flowing out into this capacious uteri, because they have 2 uteruses. So 150 babies per uterus. And we don't think they give birth all at once in a giant sort of explosive parturition in the ocean. We think they sprinkle them sort of one at a time. They fall off the end of the production line. Whale shark scientists call this crop dusting. Yeah, it's not great. We're a savory bunch. They swim around in the open ocean, dropping off baby whale sharks when they're pregnant. And where do they go for the first years of life? We don't know. Very few whale sharks are ever seen at that size. Very occasionally, we do see whale sharks about this big. They'll show up in the Philippines or off the coast of India and Pakistan, and only those 2 places really in the world. And then we lose them until they're about 13 feet long, where they show up in a place in Djibouti. I kid you not. The whale sharks will show up there. We think of that as the whale shark nursery. But where they are for the interceding 10 feet, we don't know. My guess is they're probably in the deep scattering layers of the ocean, feeding on plankton and lanternfish, and they don't come back to the surface until they're ready to mix it up with predators. So, did you have a question in the back?
That's one. For when they're deep diving, do you think, I know you mentioned for the younger ones are most likely feeding, the older ones, do you think they would also be getting food down there?
Yeah, so I have a running disagreement with my grad student, Cameron Perry, about this. He thinks they go down there to feed, and I don't. So how do we tell the difference in tag data? Well, going down to feed is what we would call a U dive. You go down, you stay down there while you're feeding, and then you come up. But that's not what we see with whale sharks. We see what we call V dives or bounce dives, where they just go until they hit a depth, and then they come back again. That's not indicative of spending time at a rich feeding layer where you found a layer of food. So I don't know why they do it. It's been suggested that they do it to get in touch with the Earth's magnetic field in order to aid them with navigation. They don't have the luxury that birds have of being able to see magnetic fields. Whale sharks probably only feel them through their magnetic systems, and they may need to go deep layers. We're pretty sure that magnetism actually does play part in their navigation. Those islands that I showed you, especially St. Peter and St. Paul rocks and Ascension, are huge magnetic anomalies. And we think probably whale sharks find them because they stand out in the open ocean, and if you have a magnetic sense, which they do. So I don't know why they do it, but whatever the reason is, it's pretty profound to put yourself through 200 or 400 atmospheres of pressure difference and 80 degrees of temperature difference. Pretty radical. Yeah.
Do whale sharks have like individual personalities or any kind of like individual characteristics you've observed?
Yeah. So do whale sharks have individual characteristics? I would say yes. Having worked with them at the aquarium for years, we definitely had, like, Yushan was kind of our shy guy, and Alice was the bossy one. We called her the spotted love bus because she would sort of swim around bushing everyone out of the way. But whenever you call that a personality, you're definitely anthropomorphizing at that point. Like, I don't think they actually function on that level. It's a good thing they're pretty because they're not that smart. It's very different from a manta ray. Like, if you go out with a manta rays are totally dialed in. It's probably one of the smartest fish that there is. They have a very large brain to body ratio. We know manta rays are very clever. Whale sharks, not so much. I've seen their brains. It's not a lot to write home about, unfortunately. Very small. You have a question? I think you had your hand up before, but.
That was my question. The biggest fish in the world, I just wonder how big their brains were.
Yeah, so from a 25-foot whale shark, the brain would fit in the palm of my hand. And it doesn't really look like a brain. It's mostly the olfactory lobe, so the stuff that's to do with processing smells takes up the biggest part of their brain. And then the rest of it, the hindbrain, is mostly for coordinating body movement. And so I don't think they have any kind of cognitive capacity. They do watch you when you're in the water. They can see you and they track you with their eye. They tend not to disrupt whatever it is that they're doing because of you. And they can show interest. Had whale sharks definitely turn around and come back to investigate, which is interesting. But I think you'd be hard pressed to train them to fetch. So, yeah.
Social behaviors with them in the wild between like interspecies?
Yeah, so have we seen social behaviors? Not so much within whale sharks, although there's some tantalizing evidence about, in that Mexico aggregation I told you about at the beginning, where it's all juvenile males, that there are females, but they hang around on the edge of the group, which is interesting. But I can say that pretty much everywhere where we study whale sharks, they're rarely alone. So if you put a camera on a whale shark and let them swim away, very quickly they will have all kinds of other animals coming and hanging around them. Either the ones that just want to swim alongside, like a tuna or a jack, amberjack, something like that, to things like remoras that want to stick to them a little more tenaciously. And they are very rarely alone. They become little islands of biodiversity moving around in the open ocean with all kinds of cadre of hangers-on that stick around with them. It's really quite cool to see. Putting cameras on them has been some of the most fun work that we've ever done. So, yes.
So has the population that was at Obosh, have they left entirely? Because we tell people what a great experience we had there years ago and to go there, but if they're gone.
Yeah, so we think they moved around to Contoy. And what we think might have happened actually is that Contoy was the normal and Holbox was the aberration, but it brought them closer to the shore where people were able to swim with them at Holbox. The ones at Contoy are still, a good boat ride offshore, right into the blue water. So we think maybe there were a couple of lean years where maybe the tuna didn't show up to spawn and they went to get some alternative food at Holbox. And it was when things returned to normal that they went back to the Afuera site off Contoy, where they spend most of their time these days. The truth is you can find a whale shark anywhere through that region, and that whale shark biosphere reserve now goes all the way down the coast of Yucatan to Siancan, the national park that's now down near the Belize border. So it's a very extensive national park protected area. Some questions about their ability to enforce it, but at least the protections are there, and the responsibility for looking after whale sharks is being accepted by the Mexican government. You had a question?
How do you retrieve the images from the cameras you put on?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when you put a camera tag on, how do you get it back? You have to go and manually retrieve it. There's two ways we can do that. We can either just go back and take the clamp off, or more often we put what we call a galvanic release on it. So the moment you put the clamp on, there's a metal link on the clamp that starts corroding. It's made of zinc usually, or zinc and magnesium together. It corrodes. We know it takes approximately 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours. You get different size links. And then the tag will pop off and we'll have a little beacon on it. And then we'll drive around in the ocean with an antenna listening for that beacon and hopefully find the camera. We've done it a number of times successfully. I've also had a couple of heartbreaking ones where we couldn't find the tag. That's expensive because those tags are not $1,000 or $4,000. They're more like $12,000 and $13,000. So lose one of those and it's a big hit to your program. So, but these are the things that we do. I have a marine biologist friend who lives on the West Coast here, and she likes to say, being a marine biologist means throwing expensive stuff in the ocean and sometimes getting it back. So, yep.
How many whale sharks are captive? And is that where your baseline data for blubber comes from? And second part was when you were talking about the single necropsy that happened in Thailand, have there been any of captive whale sharks to learn more?
Yeah, so the first part, how many whale sharks are there in captivity? It's under 10. So it's 2 aquariums in Japan, or 3 aquariums in Japan, Georgia Aquarium in Atlanta, and 2 aquariums in China that have them. It's sometimes hard to know what the total is. The Chinese are not big on sharing that kind of information. I have been to Chimelong Aquarium, which is an amazing facility not far from Hong Kong, where they have whale sharks as well. It's even bigger than Georgia Aquarium. It's huge. And so the total number of animals is less than 10, and they've been wonderful ambassadors for introducing people to this species. You asked about necropsies and have we seen other pregnant females than the one that was looked at in Taiwan? The answer is no, because all the ones that have been looked at in aquariums are juveniles. They're more of that Mexico size class, the 25 to 30 foot size, even when they're big. We haven't been keeping whale sharks in aquariums long enough yet for them to get to that Galapagos kind of size range. If those animals truly are over 100 years old, none of those aquariums are 100 years old, so we haven't had time to get to that point yet. So, but they are designed, Georgia Aquarium is designed to have them for the rest of their natural life. Yeah.
So if you were to get an email from a colleague tomorrow that said, we just discovered blank, what is your dream blank?
Yeah, such a great question. I would have 2 things that I really want to know. Where are they pupping and how deep can they dive? I really want to know how deep they can dive, and mostly just sheer pig-headedness at this point. I'm just so mad that I've spent 10 years and thousands of dollars trying to answer this question, and I'm no closer to knowing now than well, no, that's not true. I am about 6,000 feet closer than I was before, but I still don't know how deep they can dive, and that drives me mad. Because there has to be a reason to do that to your body. It's very severe physiological stress. Things that are not toxic at the surface are radically toxic at that depth. Biochemistry starts to act really weird under pressure. So whatever reason they have for doing it has to matter. So I really want to know, do they go all the way to the bottom? Don't you?
Yes.
Yes. All the way in the back.
So I wanted to ask if you noticed any interactions between the whale sharks and other big predators in the sea, if there's some sort of like protective presence they have. Maybe that might be the interaction between the tuna and the whale sharks.
Yes, I think you're probably right. I think the tuna do gather around them for some sense of shelter. And we do see that for a lot of species that will gather around the head of a whale shark to get away from tuna or blacktip sharks or other things that would like to eat them. It's a partly successful strategy. I've also seen other predators like rainbow runner picking things off that have gathered around the head of a whale shark for protection. They'll just come in and pick them off the edge. And then sometimes the whale shark will just open its mouth and eat everybody. Seen that happen too. And that happens in Tanzania quite a bit. In Chofo, they will gather around the whale sharks thinking that they're about to get protected, and the whale shark is like, eat the whole thing. So yeah, very cool. So yes.
Does the whale shark have cartilaginous bones like other sharks?
Yes, all whale sharks, just like every other shark, have cartilage bones. They are a little bit calcified. but it's not, at the tissue level, it's not bone. Bone has a very specific tissue structure, and on a microscope, it looks very unique. Theirs is cartilage, but it's reinforced with calcium. So you can think about it as being kind of rocky cartilage. Yeah.
Do you have any like hypotheses on where they might be pupping
Yeah.
or where you want them?
Yes, we call it MORPH, the mid-ocean remote pupping hypothesis. So we think they go out to those oceanic islands that I showed you before, and probably pup in those places. They've got to have safe places to put animals, and going to those islands is risky because other predators go there as well. It might be safer to actually drop them off out in the open ocean. There's some thought about a place in the eastern tropical Pacific where two ocean currents pass each other in opposite directions. We call it the eastern tropical front. And we think maybe they swim back and forth along the front, dropping the babies off. But what happens to them after that? We think maybe they just go down into the depths and feed on little things that they can find down there until they have to be big enough when they get back to the surface that they can mix it up with a full-grown tiger shark, for example, which unless you're over 7 or 8 feet long, it's going to be difficult. So we call it gape evasion strategy. Outgrow the mouth of the thing that wants to eat you. It can't fit you in its mouth, it can't eat you. So combine that with getting that crazy thick skin, then you're pretty much invincible at that point. If you're 45 feet long, your skin's 5 inches thick and it's vulcanized rubber, you're immune to everybody. And so at that point, whale sharks just ignore everybody and everything, and they just go about their business. And I really respect that.
Let's do a couple questions from home.
Sure.
Okay. But first, a comment. Patricia would like to tell you Lucy fell asleep, but Andrew says, "Great job, Daddy. Good night from the East Coast."
Thank you, honey.
Very sweet. Okay. Great. So this is from Gregory. Great presentation, Dr. Dove. Great from University of Maine here. Are there any public websites or data sets of tracked whale sharks?
Yes, you can find tracked whale sharks in a number of different places. Let's see, there might be some on the OSearch website. I think they've looked to attract some whale shark tracks to that. You'll also find the photo ID database that I mentioned before. Wildbook is really good for that. They could find, that's mostly based on photo ID rather than satellite tag tracks. I used to have a Twitter account that I used. We would put tags on whale sharks, and I had a computer savvy friend of mine hook it up to the API for Twitter so that every time this tag broke the surface and reported a geographic location, it would automatically tweet that. So the Twitter account was called Where's Domino. He used to swim around and tweet his locations in real time, which was really cool. But these days, in terms of a single website where you can find tagged whale sharks, not a single site, but certainly you might find some at the OSearch website. You might look up other big groups like the Galapagos Whale Shark Project and the Marine Megafauna Foundation. They both tag whale sharks quite a lot.
Okay, one more from home. It seems like, this is from Tamara. It seems like when you bolt tag the sharks, there are no risks of infection. Why not?
So I think there's always a risk of infection whenever you puncture the skin of an animal, but in that part of the fin, there's no flesh. It's just skin and cartilage. So there's nothing really to get infected. Usually the biggest thing that happens in that situation is the tag gradually migrates out of the back of the fin. And we sometimes see a little groove that it marks where the posts moved through the skin. And it's just the drag of having water pushing on it all the time. Eventually migrates out the back of the fin, but not within a year usually, which gives you a chance to put a new tag on.
Okay, I'll do one more from home and then a few more from here. So I want to know the answer to this one too. Laura wants to know, is there any place we should avoid swimming with whale sharks, like countries or areas where our presence puts the whale shark more at risk or in danger?
Yeah, I love that question because it shows that someone's taking an interest in how to be a responsible ecotourist, and I think that's super, super important. That location in Cancun, Mexico is a place that I worry about. I worry about the change from when we first started going there to more recently. And they have, the frustrating thing about it is everybody can do the right thing and it can still be too much. So even if you have only 2 swimmers and 1 guide from each boat, and there's a limited number of boats, you can still have 6, 12, 15 people on a whale shark, it's still too much. So everyone does the right thing. The operator's good, the tourists are being good, and still a little too much. So it's a very individual preference, whether you think you want to be part of it. I run into a number of people in Mexico who would say things like, that was the most amazing thing I've ever done, and I never want to do it again. Because somewhere in the middle of the day, they realized that they were becoming part of the problem and they didn't want to do that anymore. So for those people, I say go see one in an aquarium if you like. Go further afield to where you don't have to share them with hundreds of other boats. That's going to cost you, right? If you want to go to Galapagos and dive with the big females, liverboard's probably $8,000 a person. So that's not cheap, but you might want to go and see that because it's important to you to do that in a responsible fashion. But I think there are places like St. Helena where it's very, very responsible. They're sort of protected by the tyranny of distance. Not that many people go to St. Helena, even though they have an airport now. So you can go there and you're not going to have to share the animals with hundreds of people. And other places like Ningaloo in Australia, where they kind of set the gold standard of how to interact with whale sharks, they really do regulate how close you can get. And they get everybody to, the guides sit in the water with their hand like this, and you'll have to line up under their hand. So the whale shark swims by, everybody has a look, takes a photo, and the animal goes about its business. It's all very controlled, and there's very minimal amount of animal interference. So you can find a place like that, or go see them in an aquarium, or go do a dive somewhere.
A few more questions from the audience.
Yes.
The ones that are in the aquariums, are those juvenile males or are they variety?
Yes, so juvenile males at the moment at Georgia Aquarium, yeah. So I think it's probably best not to mix the genders in an aquarium because it prevents any risk of sexual related behaviours that might become problematic. As you have in any situation where you have males and females in close confines, that might be difficult. So probably best to stick to one species in the population, yeah. There's a place, Okinawa Jerami Aquarium in Japan, they've had the same male, Jinta his name is, they've had him for over 25 years. So he's going strong. So. Yes.
Seeing the map of the range of the whale shark, it looks like Southern California falls into it to some extent. And I'm just kind of interested in knowing how many sightings we have maybe in the summertime in Southern California.
Yeah, so if you get down into Baja, certainly, on both on the bay side and on the outside, there are whale sharks in all of that. In California itself, occasional. And probably there might be better people in the room to direct this to than me, people who know more about California biology than I do. I do remember giving a similar talk at Monterey Bay Aquarium once, and one of the old-timey biologists there put his hand up and told me about a mixed aggregation of basking sharks and whale sharks together in Monterey Bay. Which was crazy to me because we always think about these two species, the two great plankton eating sharks, as dividing up the ocean. The whale sharks live in the low latitudes and the basking sharks live in the high latitudes, and never the twain shall meet. But apparently they do, and occasionally may even aggregate together. So, but suffice to say that on the California coast, it's not very common. You are dominated by these colder water species, and you have the problem of having white sharks here. Although they don't prey on whale sharks, as far as we know, the only animal that preys on adult whale sharks is orca. It's now been filmed in Baja a couple of times. They flip them over, they work together to harass the whale shark until it dies, and they flip it over and pluck out its liver, which is the most energy dense part of the body. Orcas are just stone cold, man. Imagine hassling a poor whale shark just trying to eat plankton, man. It's not bad. Yep.
Curious, the captive whale sharks. How do you provide sustenance for them? How much do they eat?
Yeah, so not as much as you think. So how do you feed a captive whale shark? At Georgia Aquarium, we fed them from boats. The exhibit really is very large. So we would put boats in the tank and we had tag lines. We would pull the boat along the tag line and trail plankton in the water in front of them. Several species of commercially available krill that are harvested in the Great Southern Ocean. And then the whale shark will swim forward. We try to get them to mimic their natural feeding behavior. And we mix that up with fish eggs, crab roe, and other things that they like. They go crazy for crab roe. That's the best. And variety is the spice of life. Georgia Aquarium has a full-time nutritionist who formulates diets for all the animals. And so we know everything they've eaten every day since they first came to the aquarium 15 years ago. So. Yes, in the back.
You mentioned 2 instances in which people reported seeing their mating. What did they describe?
Yeah, so I mentioned a lot of splashing. One of the people was a commercial fisherman, and the other one was the island's chief fisheries officer. So very competent observers, both of them, especially the chief fisheries officer. They both described female whale shark on the top and male whale sharks coming in underneath and rotating upside down. And then the females stopped and they went into a vertical position. Much splashing ensued, and presumably there was some copulation happening, although that might have been hard to actually see because there would have been a lot of flailing and bubbles and things. But catching shark reproduction of any kind on camera is very rare. They tend to do it quickly, and they tend to stop swimming while they're doing it, which for a lot of sharks is bad. So in the case of whale sharks, probably not. So I wonder sometimes that place in St. Helena whether breeding on the surface was a bit unusual and that actually they do most of their breeding on some kind of smooth rocky platform on the bottom. I showed you from the bargans in Indonesia, they can sit still for hours. So they could copulate for a long time lying on the bottom and be just fine. That would be lethal for a number of other shark species. So it would be really cool to picture that. Unfortunately, 2,000 feet is deep. Even for the best camera tags, it would be dark. So it'd be hard to film that. So, yes, we've got a lot of questions tonight.
Has a whale shark got teeth?
Has a whale shark got teeth? Yes, they've got about 3,000 teeth. They all line the bottom jaw. I don't think I have a picture that would show that. They're tiny. It feels like the hook half of Velcro. So if you know what I mean, like there's the furry half and then the hook half, it feels like the hook half of Velcro. They're non-functional, we think, just a vestige of their ancestors that they inherited those teeth from. But yes, manta rays have teeth too.
So are they filter feeders or?
They are absolutely filter feeders. I didn't spend any time talking about their filter feeding apparatus tonight, but it is truly remarkable. It comes from the leading edge of the gills, gill rakers we would call these, and they've become so interdigitated that they cannot be separated. So it looks like a kitchen scrubby. You know, there's green kitchen scrubbies. It looks and feels a lot like that. It's quite a hard surface. The average gap size is a little bit less than 1 millimeter. But they're able to filter things that are much smaller than that. How? They do it through a process called cross-flow filtration. A lot of work out by a lady who works here in California, Misty Page Tran, who worked that out. And it is, so a deadhead filter, like if you pour your pasta through the colander, that's a deadhead filter. The water goes through the filter, leaves the product behind. Cross-flow filters, the water goes across the filter. The particles have more momentum and they carry on to the back of the throat. The water gets dragged out through the gills by surface tension. It's a very, very efficient way. That's kind of how plankton nets work and why plankton nets are so long and skinny, right? And all that plankton gathers in the cod end at the very back of the plankton net because along the length of this huge long net, the water has gone out through the mesh. That's kind of how whale sharks do it. So they're able to filter things that are much smaller than the holes in their filter pads.
Thank you.
Misty Peg Tran was one of our Discovery lecture speakers maybe about a couple years ago. So that lecture is recorded and on our YouTube page. She did talk about whale sharks a little bit, but some of her other work. Let's do one more question.
Yes.
How many instances of orcas been acting like that towards?
How many instances of orcas acting against whale sharks? At least 3 or 4 now. The first one that was filmed rocked the whale shark world, and we scientists were like, oh my God, someone got this on film. And now it's actually become kind of regular. I think there's a couple of places, and probably, as is often the case with orcas, specific individual animals or specific family groups that now teach this behavior as a culture within their group. Just in the same way, you might have seen other orcas that like to wash the seals off the ice floes. Same kind of deal. They've worked out how to prey on whale sharks, and now they're teaching it to other members of the family. So.
Okay, please join me in thanking Dr. Duff. The wonderful, wonderful lecture.